Folks, what's going on? Heir of Carthage here, and I am back in Total War Warhammer 2, where we are going to be seeing the Tomb Kings take on the Dark Elves. These are a couple of pretty good multiplayer factions out there, both of which are fairly versatile. Now, personally, I prefer the Dark Elves. I feel like they're an extremely versatile faction, but that's just my playstyle, I think, plays into it. Tomb Kings are also a fairly competitive faction with a lot of good units and builds, especially from range. They have some pretty big dangers. Let's actually start off looking at the Dark Elves today. Their build is going to be led by Lokhir Fellheart on his dragon, and let's take a look at his abilities so we catch everything we know he's going to be good at. He's got Deadly Onslaught, which, again, one I don't tend to bring, but can be useful if you get in the right fight. Dreaded Duelist, nothing wrong with this one at all. Extra melee defense and attack's always good, especially if you have someone nerfing you. Foe Seeker is usually a solid investment. And you can see Helm of the Kraken here, which is going to help him restore hit points. So the first three units up front are Dread Spears, then there are three Dark Shards. They're in a bit of a blocky formation right now. This may be to help them turn and fire easier, but also always very risky, especially if you were to come up against like a Casket of Souls or something, which there isn't one in this case. But there is a Reaper Bolt Thrower here, and I actually kind of like this pick versus the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Kings can really screw you up from range. I don't know that the Reaper Bolt Thrower answers all of it, but at least gives them something to shoot at, and I think is a worthwhile investment. Outside of that, we're going to have a Blackguard of Nagaron in the back, and a Harganeth Executioner. It's a pretty heavy investment into infantry, and you've also got Lokhir, so there's a ton of infantry killing capability. There's some nice anti-large capability too, with a couple of Cold One Knights lined up in the back. This is good armor-piercing, anti-large damage. So a relatively weak front line, backed up by a very powerful second line, supported by Dark Shards and a Bolt Thrower and Cavalry, and then a Sorceress Lore of Shadow with the Penumbral Pendulum, which is a really good pick against pretty much anybody who's going to be using any infantry units. Now, as far as the Tomb Kings, there are a couple of Carrion deployed far out on the flanks, and then we have a couple of Bow-Shabti, or Ushabti with great bows, however you want to call them here. Just the standard variety. We do not have a Chosen of the Gods here. Behind them, let's take a look at some of the other cool units. There's a bunch of Skeleton Spears, including the King Nakesh's Scorpion Legion. And then a unit that we don't see every day, but is better as of recent patches, is going to be Necropolis Knights with Halberds. This is a very capable anti-large unit, given the opportunity. There's a Necrotect and a Chariot. He does have the Restore ability with him to help support. In this case, it would just be the Necropolis Knights and the Ushabti, but never a bad idea. There's some Skeleton Warriors in the back. We have Settra on his Chariot of the Gods, so he's going to be very powerful indeed. Do not underestimate Settra on his Chariot. I would say it's probably a more threatening unit than his big kitty cat Sphinx. That's just me, though. There are also a couple of Skeleton Horsemen, so not hardly any infantry here for the Tomb Kings. But plenty of, support units, range, mobility, anti-large, all kinds of stuff. So lots of support units. You can see immediately that the Bolt Thrower is going to target the Bow-Shabti, and it probably kind of needs to here. Don't disagree with the targeting. The Bow-Shabti are going to be a huge threat to everything that the Dark Elves have. At this point, though, the Tomb King player makes a mistake here. I'm going to slow this down and try and point out mistakes that players make, not because I'm harping on them. I'm really glad they sent the replay, and I enjoy this one. I think you're going to also. But because I think this is good for all of us to learn from, because I make mistakes like this sometimes. I'm sure you all do too. So let's call it out and see if we can all be better players. So in this case, the Shabti with Great Bow stayed there just a hair too long and got shot up by the Dark Shards. This is a trade that you really shouldn't allow to happen, and you can see here that the Tomb King player corrects it near immediately. And that's good. These Dark Shards are going to be brutally effective against just about anything the Tomb Kings are throwing here. So you can see that the Necropolis Knights pull up and kind of hover under Lokhir, which is where they should be. If he comes to the ground, yeah, and notice they're immediately ready to get him. Look at this here again. So the mistake a moment ago with the Ushabti with Great Bow, which was quickly corrected, but look, you almost can't correct this. The Necrotech gets half of his life deleted near instantly. So let's keep going here. So you gotta watch out when you got stuff like that sitting around. Dark Shards are a death sentence to single entities like this. Very nice pendulum here by the Dark Elves to start things off. Gonna nearly crumble the Skeleton Spears on that flank almost instantly. However, while making a good move there, the Dark Elf player makes a somewhat poor move here where Lokhir gets down amongst these Necropolis Knights And he really needs to try and get back in the air, but it's going to be hard to do now that he's being pursued by Settra. And despite using all of his buffs, Lokhir just overextended himself. And you can see here, I want to call this out too, very nice positioning of the skeleton here. If Lokhir tries to take off this way, he's going to get slowed down, even if just for a second, in the skeletons, and he has a harder time pushing through these heavy units to get out this way. So it was a nice trap played by the Tomb Kings, and although he made a mistake with his Necrotect here, he kind of makes up for it by getting Lokhir, and that is a big win. But the battle's not over, folks. The Dark Elves have a massive advantage pretty much everywhere else in the battlefield. Let's talk a couple more like pros and cons here. Now, the Tomb King player came in with their Carrion to finally shut up these Dark Shards temporarily. Great play. That's what Carrion are used for, and it did a good job, and it got these Dark Shards off his case for a minute. The unfortunate thing was it's just a hair too late to save his Necrotech. Could have been very helpful late in this fight. And then if we look at other things here, you can see the Dark Elf player is keeping his cavalry close to support the Dark Shards while allowing his infantry to engage the enemy infantry. This is also a very good play because every attempt the Tomb Kings player is making is getting shut down by these Cold Blood Knights. You can see here the Summoned Ushabti, the Skeletal Horsemen, they're all getting absolutely owned trying to take out these units, and it's costing the Tomb Kings pretty dearly in their attempts here. I think these attempts from the Tomb Kings are honestly just a little premature. And here's why I say that. I think that the Skeletal Horsemen are so much faster than the Cold Blood Knights. Don't even bring them in close. Just leave your sacrificial skeleton units to do the work they're going to do, and do what you can with Settra, and just kind of sit back with the Ushabti with Great Bow. Start massacring the most threatening units on the battlefield. So you have a Necropolis Knight. Back that Necropolis Knight up, hold back here, fire at the Dark Shards, and then probably the Blackguard. Outside of that, these Cold One Knights won't pose as much of a threat if you have some Necropolis Knights left. But again, the Tomb King player getting a little bit ahead of himself here and is desperate to get rid of the Dark Shards. And you actually have a pretty good answer to him back here. But look what happens. As soon as these Necropolis Knights get close, the Dark Shards are spaced apart here. And despite being in a somewhat blocky formation, the Dark Elf player gets it totally right here in spacing them apart, where when one unit charges in, it faces the fire from all the others, and the Necropolis Knights get wrecked. Yet another Pendulum right before the Sorcerer goes. So that's 3 Pendulums off the Sorcerer for 115 kills. So a pretty good play there by the Dark Elves. Now over here, there are some Cold One Knights helping to rout some crumble some Skeleton Spears. And then here, they're holding back Settra. They don't get the best surround or charge, though. And then they're going to take fire from the Ushabti with Great Bow. So I do kind of like this play here by the Ushabti with Great Bow and Settra. Settra taking a little damage here that he probably doesn't need to, but it's not bad because this positioning allows the Ushabti to get lots of quick kills on the Cold One Knights, while the Cold One Knights weren't in an ideal damage returning scenario there against Settra. Now Settra has to watch out for these Dark Shards. The Dark Shards are definitely the thing here that is the biggest threat to Settra. Nothing else on this battlefield now, and number 2 would definitely be the Blackguard. But nothing else on this battlefield is near as much of a threat to Settra as the Dark Shards. If Settra has the Dark Shards gone, he's going to be fairly safe. There's not many Cold One Knights left, and he's really good against infantry. He also has the Incantation of Protection, which will give him 44% physical resistance. The infantry is going to have a difficult time keeping up with them. You can see the Dark Elf player here sticking somewhat close together with his troops. This is good. Don't get split up. And pushing to try and hit the Ushabti with the Dark Shards. The challenge with this is the Ushabti are just faster. The Dark Shards can't catch up. They cannot get into range. Which means that these Ushabti with Great Bow are going to get their shots. And so the Dark Elf player seems to kind of accept this for the moment, and instead tries to focus down Settra a little. And you can see some cavalry coming over here, and Settra is going to use the Nehru's Incantation of Protection, help keep Settra safe from all this damage while he gets in here and causes some damage of his own. You can see the explosion there coming in. Settra can certainly do some damage with that if you blob up on him with infantry or other stuff late game. Nice play here by the Dark Elves to get the Reaper Bolt Thrower back in the game, because this is a close game. And right now, the power bar says it's firmly in favor of the Dark Elves. At this point, the Ushabti with Great Bow are running low on ammo, though they're still capable of causing some big damage. And I think there's a couple of interesting potential plays here. The Dark Elf player, 1, needs to keep as many of their Dark Shards alive as possible, and they need to have units left to protect them. Protecting them from Settra is going to be very difficult. And engaging Settra this early with the Cold One Knights is honestly kind of giving Settra what he needs. Those Cold One Knights are the only thing that can block the mass of Settra of getting through to the Dark Shards. So at this point, I kind of disagree. I feel like the Cold One Knights should be kept out of range of the Great Bows and kept away from Settra for as long as possible. And then if they can protect the Dark Shards late, they can block Settra from getting to them, and the Dark Shards can keep the Ushabti from Great Bow and Settra from doing the damage they need to. Instead, the High Elf player is going to take a more aggressive tack here, and we'll see whether it works. He's chasing aggressively the Ushabti. One of the chasers out here is the expensive Blackguard. So it's a very expensive unit to put out on the chase like that. It leaves Settra back here to just kind of terrorize all the units who are, you know, local to him here. Now these are conundrums you may find yourself in when you're playing a match of your own. You get into a situation like this. The Dark Elves have no leadership, but they have a ton of units. But they have to deal with a character who is very difficult to deal with even when you have a leader, and that's Settra on the Chariot. And in this case, the Dark Elves in some ways are kind of playing into his favor. I like this move here though. While Settra's back here dinking around, shoot him with the crossbows. But now remember earlier I said that the Dark Elf player did a good job of separating them. That was earlier. Now they're a little too close together because he was in a hurry to get shots at Settra, and I don't blame him. He needs shots on Settra. And see, when they get close together like this, it's a 2-for-1 for Settra. He's just going to roll right through, and you can see immediately routes one. Another one starts wavering before it even ends up in combat. Now, nice damage by the Dark Shard. You can see why I was saying these are the units you want to have late in the game to kill Settra. And it's because of the amount of damage they did to him. Nothing else on this battlefield is going to be able to crank that kind of damage against Settra. So nice play here to get some done, but definitely this is why I was saying you do everything you can to protect these Dark Shards. I don't think the Ushabti with Great Bow had enough ammunition to kill all your Dark Shards, and really all you need is a unit or two, and then to keep them protected with the Knights you had earlier. So at this point, you can see the Blackguard obviously can't catch the Ushabti, so it makes this not a good position for them because now they're just exhausted. They've lost all their vigor, and that'll actually reduce their fighting stats as well. And their stats are needed because now the Blackguard is the only unit here that has any potential to deal with Settra. So it's so weird. I don't know if y'all heard an alert box noise there. I have the alert box turned on my Streamlabs, but it still makes noise. I don't know. That one's interesting to me. I guess I'll just have to like do something else to it. In any case, yeah, you can see Settra here is going to go for a quick charge on the Blackguard because they're not braced. If you see this happening, and look, they're also being shot by the Ushabti, so look how quick the hit points start dropping off of these Blackguard, and that's going to start swinging the power bar a little bit here, you can see, because of how important these Blackguard are to the fight. If you're getting charged by the Chariot, it won't do a lot. You can always just pick the unit, hit backspace, but this basically left them with their back turned to the Ushabti they were chasing, and now they become the target of aggression, and that Ushabti is getting some nice kills. Not any ammunition left, though, for the other unit, but now the problem for the Blackguard is there's really nothing to keep Settra from being able to continue to charge into this fight and just wreck the infantry. And so really the Tomb Kings are going to be able to potentially turn this around now, even though the Dark Elves had plenty of tools to potentially kill Settra. So I think a couple of key lessons here for the Dark Elves. Lokhir got engaged way too early. If Lokhir had sat back in the protection radius of the Dark Shards, he could have kept Settra from attacking the infantry, and then the Dark Shards could have kept Settra away. Let your infantry win big. Now if you have Lokhir, you can use him to help contain the speed of Settra, and he can close the distance on the Ushabti with Great Bow, potentially, right? It's an interesting battle, very close. Both players, I think, made some mistakes here. You can see it still says it's in favor of the Dark Elves, and it's because these Blackguard are seriously strong units. You're going to see the incantation of Cursed Blades here to help out the Ushabti with Great Bow. Going to be some devastating charges come in, and then the Dark Elves need to quickly get this infantry regrouped and back over to the fight, which they are working on as we speak. But Settra is just on a rampage. This guy is nearly impossible to stop without some mass, and the Dark Elves just have no mass left. There is none. So when you see a unit like Settra on the battlefield, realize that this guy can be a one-unit army if you don't have the right counters. And so I think the key here for the Dark Elves was making sure that you don't lose some mobility and mass. You have to have that late into the game. And even though the Tomb Kings, I think, made some mistakes early, one thing they didn't do was get Settra killed early, and Settra was always intended to be a huge part of the damage component of this army. And all Settra needs in order to be successful at causing the damage is not being challenged by high mass units or lords who are capable of killing other large lords like this. So when Lokhir went down and the Cold Ones went down, it wasn't over, but Settra was certainly in a good position because Settra can kill crossbows. He can even kill Blackguard if he has something to hold them for just a minute. But he can't kill Lokhir very well, not by himself at least, and he can't very well kill Cold One Knights great by himself either. He can do it for a little while, don't get me wrong. But anyway, fun battle, fun battle. Hopefully you all enjoyed this one too. Mistakes happen sometimes. It's fun to learn from them. I have made mistakes like this multiple times. I remember one time Settra came into a battle, and I pretty much annihilated him early on, like he had almost none of his hit points left, and so I turned my focus elsewhere while I still had the units to finish him. Settra ended up killing me in the end of that. He was able to get some heals and some incantation and protection. I lost. I lost the battle because of that mistake that I made with him. You can't turn your back on those units like that. And so I think the early loss of Lokhir here for almost no benefit was just too costly for the Dark Elves in this particular case. I like some of their picks, though. I mean, the Dark Shards early on, the way they were positioned, where no one unit could tie them all down, and they were protected by the Cold One Knights, that was great. If you're going to bring a unit like Dark Shards, get it into that protective position. Plus, they completely wiped out a Necrotech. That right there is a pretty good trade right off the bat, and they were able to do some damage to the Ashabti with Great Bow early on, so the Dark Shards were certainly showing their potential here, and they have a lot of it. They're shielded. There's a lot of good potential that those units had. They didn't get to meet all of it in the end, and just a really fun battle. I like the matchup between Tomb Kings and Dark Elves too. It's a fun one. Hope you all enjoyed this particular battle. Appreciate it being sent in by Wario. Had a good time watching this. I mean, there's always things to learn from your battles, whether it's you or someone else. So if these players are watching this and they're like, man, Air's picking at me. No, don't get me wrong, guys. I'm just trying to talk it through, help us all be better players. Like I said, I make these kind of mistakes in almost every battle, if not every battle. It just takes practice. We all got to keep at it. But the game's fun. Hopefully you're having fun with it. I think that's another key part to multiplayer. Don't get wrapped up too much. Have fun when you play. And when you do make mistakes, just look at it. Be like, all right, I think I can do better than that next time. Don't get yourself down, or else it can get really boring and frustrating to play. Anyway, hope you all enjoyed it. HeirofCarthage signing out. I will see you soon with some more Total War Warhammer 2 content.